when you're overseas, people don't look at you like a guitar player or a cab driver. You're an American. I never thought of myself as an American. I'm from New Jersey.
All right, welcome to Rock Docs, a podcast about music documentaries brought to you by Treble Media, treblezine.com. They are good people. They write about music and relevant to today's topic. We'll link to this in the show notes, but check out, they do this Treble 100 where they've been counting down their 100 favorite albums of all time, which is the final canonical list that nobody can argue with. And so they have an article about Born to Run by one Bruce Springsteen, and the subject of today's documentary features in that. But anyway, so check that out, and thanks, Treble. Oh, and I'm here with I'm Dave Lizerbram, here with my co-host
Andrew Keatts.
Should have since you're
You know what? It's great, but let's get to the meat here. What are we talking about today? What do we got?
What are we talking about today? We are talking about a film called Stevie Van Zandt, Disciple. So Stevie Van Zandt, Disciple, about the musician, raconteur, actor, political, world-changing political figure, Steve Van Zandt, also known as Miami Steve and also known as Little Steven, famously from the E Street Band, the Sopranos, and other things. And it's out now. It's a recent movie, 24, on the old HBO Max, whatever they call it. Directed by Bill Teck, who I think this is, if I'm not wrong, this is the first rock doc he's done. But yeah, he's done like a documentary about Peter Bogdanovich and stuff like that. So
he only works within the Sopranos extended universe.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. The Bobby Bacala behind the scenes doc is coming soon.
He's doing a documentary on the making of the podcast with Christopher and Bobby Bacala.
He's gonna go deep into Little Carmine.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, that's the documentary about Steve Van Zandt. How much did you go into this knowing about Steve Van Zandt, Andy?
I mean, I guess in the grand scheme of things, not probably with pretty limited understanding. I mean, which is a weird thing to say because from somebody who's very famous in a number of different walks, I knew.
And things you're a fan of.
And things I'm a fan of, yeah.
Mostly apartheid.
Yeah. Jesus. Yeah.
Let me correct the record. Anti-apartheid. My bad.
Yeah.
Get those confused.
I mean, I guess I would say it is true that I was probably first introduced to Steven Van Zandt, like knowingly, in Sopranos.
Really? Okay.
Probably. I mean, I think I probably found out that he was in. Yeah, I did. I found out he was in Bruce Springsteen's band while watching that movie. Now, granted, I was watching that movie in ninth grade.
Right.
That show in ninth grade.
Okay.
I was pretty young.
Yeah.
But, and then otherwise, I mean, I really never really went very deep on Disciples of Soul or any of his solo work. I knew he had an expansive career outside of his workings with Bruce Springsteen, but I hadn't really listened to any of it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess I would say that I'm clearly the Steve Van Zandt head of this crew then, because for one thing, I kind of grew up in the adjacent to the Springsteen world. Had cousins and family members who were like way into Springsteen from back in the 70s, and I fell in love with Springsteen, as a teenager, and was just way into the whole thing. Checked out his solo stuff as a young person, and kind of dipped in and out from time to time. I mean, certainly by the time The Sopranos came out, I was like, wow, that's a musician I really like, Steve Van Zandt. And I already knew. Like, I'd heard interviews with him, like he was just a guy, like that. Anytime he shows up, somewhere, it's going to be interesting,
Totally. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, certainly by the time I saw this movie, I had grokked that right. He is a fascinating figure. He's happy to talk about things. He does have, what I would call like a bad normie Twitter account. I don't really, In the same way, I think in a recent episode we talked about David Simon's Twitter account.
Okay.
Stevie Van Zandt's got a Twitter account on that level, I would say.
Is he mixing it up with Trump supporters
Yeah, exactly. Where it's
and
just
stuff?
like, yeah. And
Okay.
it's not even that you disagree with him. It's just like, can you maintain an air of like mystery or you
Right.
know, like
It's like an
very-
annoying uncle kind of thing.
Yeah, and I just don't want to. I don't want to see Miami Steve that way. You know,
Right. Yeah, I hear you. Well, as we'll hear, it's certainly not the first time he's waded into politics, but
No, it's true.
fair
Very
enough.
true.
But yeah, I also his book came out maybe 2 or 3 years ago, his like autobiography,
I remember
Un-
you read it and loved it. I remember.
Unrequited Infatuations. I actually listened to it because he reads it himself, and like hearing it in his voice is just wonderful. And I re-listened to it for this podcast. So I'm deep in the lore.
Okay.
And yeah, the book is great. Especially like the first 2/3. The last third of the book is kind of like, it's not that the stories are bad, it's just kind of unconnected stories. It's like, and then this happened, and then I was in this show, or then,
Yeah.
and it's cool, but it doesn't tell a story the same way the first part. But largely the same arc as the movie.
Mm-hmm.
You definitely get the feeling that the book probably did reasonably well for these things, and people got the sense of like, oh, this guy's got a story to tell, and people love rock docs, as we know, and so they even quote from the book a few times in the movie.
Yeah.
Maybe just because the director was like, well, I didn't really get that story exactly. Why don't you could we just drop in the audio from the audio? Actually, it's from the audiobook. Like, it's literally, he didn't even reread it. So, which I think is actually kind of a cool move. Like, if the subject is already recorded in an audiobook,
Mm-hmm.
like, why not just repurpose that? I don't know.
Yeah. In the Tweedy's book, they used he read his own, and they used the audio for that in the J documentary.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
As a workaround from Jeff not participating in that movie.
Okay. Got it. Well, there you go. So anyway, yeah, let's set up the Steve Van Zandt story, I guess.
Sure. Well, so he's from a state called New Jersey.
Right. Famously.
And the movie, it's, I guess I come back to this a lot when we do these. I feel a sense of warmth and compassion when I'm put back into a soup to nuts documentary.
Right.
That's just going to give me everything from the beginning to the end. That is mostly what I want. That's mostly what I'm here for.
Yeah.
And that's what we get here.
Yeah, because most people who like come to this are not necessarily going to be deep SVZ heads like me.
And so, like, when I say, soup to nuts, like, we do the thing here where we start at the Beatles on Ed Sullivan.
Oh,
like
yeah.
The absolute most pat line and moment of any music documentary.
Yes, that was the Big Bang. That was when it all changed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although Stevie has a slight innovation on the form, which is that but then when they saw the Stones and Mick didn't smile, it meant, oh, this isn't show business. The other stuff was show business. This means you can be mean.
Right. Yeah. No, that's his thing. Yeah. He does talk about that in the book as well, where, okay, the Beatles came out and like it blew everybody's mind and changed the world, but he thought that was like, it didn't occur to him as a young, whatever, 15-year-old or something, that you could do that. It just seemed too impossible.
Yeah.
And then the Stones came out like whatever 6 months later, and he's the kind of guy where he'll tell you the date and everything. He's like has that kind of Tarantino kind of thing. And and it was like they look like they just came in off the street. They were wearing mixed match clothes, and Mick didn't smile, and it seemed doable.
Yes.
Which that is a little bit of a different take.
Yeah. So one note here, and again, this is like a lot of this is sort of stock and trade stuff for the beginnings of these documentaries, particularly of the classic rock guys. But one note I have is like, it kind of feels like we're all mixed up at the beginning of this movie. It's not necessarily moving through all linearly. Like, we do the Big Bang moment with the Stones, but then we go back to like the DJs that they were listening to that were playing black music, and that that was an introduction to him before that. and it's sort of I mean, I guess that ends up becoming his way that he talks about going on these like oldies tours, like the first era of rock and roll revival tours that were sort of had a moment here that he was playing just as like a working
A
stiff musician
sideman.
on those.
Yeah.
But sort of in the beginning, it's you don't necessarily get a sense of like how quickly we're moving through all this stuff, or if or we're going chronologically.
Yeah, the movie really starts with like it comes blasting out with like him in the 80s.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
like it's him on his solo kind of first tour, Voice of America, and he's with his band and the Disciples of Soul, or the first version of the Disciples of Soul. And it is the 80s-est thing ever, right? I mean, it just
Mhm.
like that is one thing about the documentaries. It doesn't ease you in with some like familiar Bruce Springsteen content or something like that. You are right
Mhm.
in the like Steve Van Zandt in the 80s trying to be a rock star, competing with Prince and whoever. And, that doesn't really happen. But, um, there's like, I feel like there's three kinds of guys or people who were like, prominent musicians in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
So the one kind is like people in terms of the look and the whole vibe. One kind is like people who like Madonna or somebody who like was on top of the world. And like Madonna's not going to say like, "Oh, I looked ridiculous in 1985." She looked cool and like she defined what cool was, and that's all there is to it, right? And
Okay.
then you get the people who like will look back in a rock doc about how they looked and dressed in the 80s and they'll kind of laugh about it.
Yeah.
You know what I
Maybe
mean?
maybe like Bruce.
Maybe like Bruce, he'll be like,
Yeah.
I was kind of wearing the tight jeans or whatever,
Yeah.
or like, I would like look,
Glenn Fry laughing at his appearance on Miami Vice or something like
yeah,
that.
exactly. You get
Yeah.
that where it's like, okay, well, it was the 80s. We were all dressing silly and having fun. And, now I look back and then you get guys like Steve Van Zandt that like are, the idea that like he looked a little silly is just not that he owns it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's his thing though, right? Is
Right.
like he's looked somewhat preposterous in every decade.
Kind of. Although his 70s look was like kind of cool and it fit in the E Street Band.
Totally. Yeah, I mean,
Like they
yeah,
all
that's true.
dress like, like sort of Miami pimps in a way. He
Yeah,
kind of like created a look that they maybe not Bruce, but some of the other guys in the band kind of followed.
that's true.
Whereas like by the time the 80s comes around, he goes full on like colors everywhere and things. And then he, evolved into the various guises. I mean, in this documentary, when he's interviewed, he's wearing like some kind of I don't even know purple tie-dyed blouse thing,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
he's got I mean obviously the bandanas and all that stuff, but yeah, he really yeah, he's quite committed to the bit. But yeah, so I mean, we get a lot of the oldie stuff, but he's so into that
yeah,
it's not disposed of in the way that in most documentaries like, "Oh yeah, we love the Beatles and we love the
yeah,
Stones," and then it's just like whatever. It's like that's his life. And
yeah. I mean, he has, especially in the last 20 years or so of his life, he's become like a chronicler of like an archivist of that
right.
early rock and roll history.
Yeah, and the sort of advocate, like the
Hmm.
living advocate for the pre-Beatles rock and roll in a way.
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean, basically the story is like he's just like any guys from this time. Like he graduates high school, but just barely, and he's playing in bands with this buddy that he runs into, Bruce Springsteen, and they're trying to make it. And Bruce kind of goes off and gets signed, and Stevie kind of gets dropped, and so he actually went and like worked construction for his uncle
Yeah.
for like a year, like laying tar on like the Jersey Turnpike or whatever. And he actually like he got injured or something, and one way or the other, he somehow then got
Isn't it
connected.
amazing that like no one who ever worked in their orbit ever had a New Jersey job that wasn't like a screaming stereotype of New Jersey?
Right, yeah.
Like they're all either like,
He wasn't an early computer technician.
yeah, exactly. Like there's a million jobs you could do, but he had to like lay asphalt on the Jersey Turnpike.
Right, yeah, of
Like,
course.
what are you, a gambling commissioner? Like,
Yeah, exactly. Like
yeah,
a very Sopranos coded type of job.
yeah, it's just unbelievable.
But yeah, so then somehow he gets hooked up to like there. So what happens is like all the way he tells it, and it seems to be more or less true, that all these musicians and bands and groups that were very popular, in February 1964, before the Beatles hit Ed Sullivan, like suddenly became irrelevant. And they were all like, relatively young and in the top of their game, and they were just forgotten. And in the early 70s, you get this early rock and roll revival, which is like Sha Na Na, our old buddies from
Hmm.
Festival
Hmm.
Express. You get, uh, American Graffiti, and you get some like records that come out that are popular that are like compiling this stuff. And then eventually you get, Happy Days and stuff like that. And so it's being rediscovered. There's this oldies circuit, and he just becomes like a side guitar player for a year, following these guys around. And basically, it's like he loves the Rat Pack, he loves the whole gambling, the whole thing. And they're like, "Oh, we're gonna go on tour and go to Vegas." He's like, "Okay, where do I sign up?" And it's kind of like he always talks about this as like a real rite of passage. He met all these like old time rock and roll guys, and he learned from them, and he learned the chops. He learned like kind of the right way to do it in a way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a
Um,
classic story, right? It's like one part your 10,000 hours. This is how you get your chops up by playing every single night, but it's also learning life on the road and how to actually make it as a musician.
right.
Taking your lumps in the industry, making your connections. It's Hendrix playing with James Brown, and it's
Yeah,
you
sure.
name it. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. And he, again, in the book, he goes into some more detail about, telling a story about, have blues guitar player Freddie King pulling a gun on him and all kinds of other stuff. Um, but I mean, it certainly sounds like the kind of thing that, they can make a very cheesy rock doc or biopic out of, kid
yes,
tries to make it, ends up working construction, and then gets called up and ends up playing with his idols and learning life lessons. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
sure,
Like
sure,
this
sure.
could be an HBO series,
Uh-huh.
like kind of like Vinyl.
Yeah.
It could really fit into but it seems to be what really happens in the guy's life. And then he
Hmm.
comes back to New Jersey, and he hooks up with Springsteen again. And
And basically at this point, Springsteen is like, he's made Greetings from Asbury Park. He's sort of recognizing that like he's not really a folkie. He doesn't
right,
want to do a folky thing, and he starts. And Southside Johnny is happening at this time, and they sort of together help each other arrive at this Jersey sound, this
right,
soul and rock and roll together. Bang,
right.
put them together. Let's
Yeah,
play them in bars, play them loud.
exactly. And he talks about how like prior to this, saying somebody was a bar band was like a diss. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? It just meant like you didn't make it, or you weren't good enough, or you're just playing in
Sloppy,
bands.
yeah.
Sloppy, whatever. And they reinvented this concept by like, walking into the Stone Pony, which was like 2 days away from closing, and saying like, we'll play on your worst night, and we just, keep the door and you get the bar. And like, within 2 weeks there were lines around the block. And so he gets together with this guy Southside Johnny, and they form Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes. And Southside Johnny is in this movie a lot, and
A
I
lot, yeah.
am loving it. I'm a big Southside Johnny guy.
Yeah, tell me about how much time do you spend in your life listening to Southside Johnny and the Jukes?
I mean, like more than the average person, certainly. I
Is
like
it more than you listen like today, these days? Is it more than you listen to Bruce Springsteen?
uh, uh, I mean, the catalog is a lot smaller. And
Sure.
I don't have like Southside Johnny bootlegs. I'm sure they're out there. And please, if you're listening and you got them, like I would love to hear it.
Yeah.
I just haven't made the effort to track it down.
Yeah.
I've never seen Southside, although like he still tours, and like I think he plays like the
He
belly
looks
up or whatever.
great, honestly. He
He looks
like in
great.
this movie, he looks like really. I
Yeah.
mean, they all do really,
First,
but he
first,
yeah.
first of all, Southside's like interviewed like in this movie in like his house or apartment or something, and like he's wearing a sweatshirt, and I don't know if you clocked this, but the sweatshirt is from a cemetery, but it's not like a goth thing. It
Yeah.
looks like it's from a golf club, but then if you like kind of zoom in, it's like the local cemetery.
Is it like that? Is it like the '90s grayscale champion cut? Like the
Yeah, it's kind of like that. So,
yeah, yeah.
but Southside Johnny, yeah, is like just this white soul singer, and apparently before you know it, they're just like shaking the place down. They're playing every night of the week, and there's lines around the block, and people are demanding this. And yeah, it's this combination of rock and soul with horns, and kind of like before the Blues Brothers, but it's like that kind of thing, I would say, in a way. But I would say better. But yeah, I've got those first few Southside Johnny albums on vinyl, and I went deep into it some years ago, and so I still revisit it. And like I'm just saying, person out there listening, this weekend you got people over for a barbecue. put on one of those old Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes album. Like, it's not going to be a bad time. There's
Yeah.
no way you're going to have a bad time. You know what I mean? You're just going to be like, everybody's going to be digging it. It's good time music.
No, I mean, it's not going to be any different of a vibe than if you had put on Born to Run.
Yeah, except, well, yeah.
Well, maybe not Born to
The
Run,
River,
but yeah.
maybe.
Yeah,
But
the
but
River,
everybody
yeah.
knows that, right?
Right.
Like, but this like will blend in better. Like, this is like some classic soul music that, you know, most people probably wouldn't have heard, but like every song has a great groove and great horns, and you
A lot
know,
of horns,
it's
yeah.
and it all just totally works. It's the kind of thing that could be super corny. And some people maybe think it is, but I just feel like it totally works.
Yes.
It's designed for, you know, drinking a beer, partying, and, you know, having fun with your friends, and, you know, and it is like, so it fits that kind of thing. And it does bum me out that mode of rock and roll. I know that this is the thing that I beat on about, but like that kind of mode, it doesn't seem to exist in the same way anymore. You know what I mean? It's not, it's like
Yeah.
maybe some of the jam band world is adjacent to that, but
I do think
that has a
some of the
different,
there's
that
like
has-
party bands that are like,
it's a different kind of druggy thing.
yeah, it's a party thing. It's, yeah. I mean, there's definitely a and it, sorry, my kids are jumping around. I don't know if that's coming through on the mic. If it is, to all you listeners, apologies.
Maybe they're listening to Southside Johnny and just
Yeah,
farting.
they're absolutely going nuts. I mean, I do think there's like an adjacency in the jam band world that's like less focused on virtuosity and musicianship, and is more about sort of just having a good time. And
Yeah.
like often plays at like midday in the festival, in like a jam band festival.
But that's more funk than soul, I would say.
Yeah, I would say that it is typically more funk than soul.
Yeah, and so it's just a little different. You know, it's just a little bit of a different vibe.
Yeah, like Andy Frasco. I don't know.
I mean, I'm not saying these guys don't exist. And believe me, if somebody's out there like biting Southside Johnny style today, like a new band, like send that to me. I'm into it. You know what I mean? I just feel like that kind of like you know, pre-Beatles, like, you know, Animal House style frat party music is just not.
So much of that like party music has just been swallowed by like the EDM world and all of the tentacles off of it. You know, where like if you're just trying to go nuts for a night, that's probably what you're listening to.
Yeah, I guess so, and that's fine.
Yeah,
it's just a different. Like, there's something that's a little bit more, in a way, for grown-ups about this.
Yes. I agree
Like
with that.
it works. You know, you could like just imagine people of all ages enjoying this, and it's not directed towards, you know, a certain demographic in a way. I don't know.
Yeah.
So anyway, so, you know, then famously, like, you know, we get into Bruce Springsteen. I don't know. This movie's got like a ton of talking heads, and the talking heads in this
surprising
movie.
one's the first one that surprised me is Chris Columbus.
Yes.
What is
Yes.
Is this like a famous part of Steve Van Zandt's career, that Chris Columbus is a huge fan, or Springsteen in general?
Chris Columbus, director of like
Home Alone,
and the first couple of Harry Potter movies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he
and he's like jumping out of the like through the camera to explain how much he loves these guys.
Yeah. He well, yeah, Chris Columbus kind of saved Steve Van Zandt's career, because when he was at a low in the early 90s, he hired him to do the Christmas song for Home Alone 2.
Right.
And then like that kind of kicked off a series of things that's like more explicated in the book, and kind of introduced him to Hollywood, and that's how he kind of did some film, you know, soundtrack work and stuff like that. And like that doesn't really lead to the Sopranos, but it's kind of adjacent, I guess, in a way. It like opens up a different avenue of things for him to do.
Keeps him in the game.
And they're definitely tight. So yeah, Chris Columbus. We talked about Southside. I mean, you got Paul McCartney, you got Bill Wyman. They don't really bring a huge amount, but it's cool to get those guys in there.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, it's cool to see Paul McCartney speaking reverently about Stevie.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
If Paul McCartney's going to be around and happy to talk about stuff, this is a good thing for him to do.
Sure. Yeah.
Like put your imprimatur on a true like classic rock guy, you know?
Well, yeah. He also Paul says, like, I know a lot about music. but this guy knows everything about
Yeah,
music.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, imagine
Right.
being Paul McCartney and there's a
Right.
guy who just knows more than you. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like, that's a great quote. Like,
Yeah,
they
that is
only
a
get a
great
few
quote.
seconds of Paul, but it's good.
Yeah.
But I mean, one thing I love about the movie is that you get the old time rock and roll guys. So you get Mike Stoller from Lieber and Stoller, who there's quite a few people who I did not know they were still alive who are in this movie.
Uh-huh.
The guys who wrote like Jailhouse Rock and like You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog. You know what I mean? Like, this is how far back we're going. He's
Yeah.
still alive, and he's like happy to talk about Steve Van Zandt and Gary U.S. Bonds, Dion. I mean, guys that I grew up
Dion,
listening to.
it is amazing when Dion appears. You're like, wow, okay, that's what
Yeah.
we're doing.
Yeah, like The Wanderer, Run Around Sue, Abraham Martin and John. I mean, Dion is awesome. And because Gary U.S. Bonds worked a lot with Steve Van Zandt, so like there's a connection there. And some of these guys is just like, he just knows all these guys. But I would say probably the all-star, the
Mhm.
the MVP talking head of this doc. I'm
Mhm.
sure it's not Bruce Springsteen. He's in here. He's good. But it's an unexpected person, right?
Yes. Who?
He's Eddie Vedder.
Yes. Well,
Eddie,
I mean, both Eddie and Bruce are just doing Eddie and Bruce. Like
yeah, but Eddie gives a lot.
yeah.
I figured we were going to get like one quick clip of Eddie Vedder because I know he famously sings Steve Van Zandt's song "I'm a Patriot" a lot. So like he's a fan, but like boy, I mean, you get like you get a lot of good. I mean, he's so funny in this. You know what I mean? Like,
He is.
he's really just having the time of his life. And talking about how when Steve Van Zandt leaves the E Street Band and Nils Lofgren replaces him, and how he was like,
He's like a stepdad. It was like
he's
watching.
like, I love Nils Lofgren. Don't get me wrong.
But it's like he's fucking my mom.
So good.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is just great. And the director like practically jumped out of the chair when that happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, like Eddie Vedder he understands the assignment. You know what I
That's
mean?
true.
He's not here to pontificate and
Yeah.
talk about the seriousness of rock and roll. Like, he's here to bring the good time vibes that
Yeah.
like just thinking as somebody who grew up listening to Pearl Jam,
Yeah.
that Eddie Vedder in the year of our Lord 2024 would be that guy.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Would be the guy
Yeah.
who's like survived and seen it all and is just bringing the positive good time vibes. It's beautiful to see. I love it.
It's funny that just like I don't know, maybe you have a different perspective on this, but Eddie is so forthcoming with how much he was into this music in the early 80s when he was a
Right.
teen. Much like he is in the Tom Petty doc. He
Yeah.
just talks about how much he loved Tom Petty. And it's sort of interesting how like quickly both of those guys were seen as uncool in the early 90s when Eddie Vedder took over popular music.
Yeah.
That just you just had to wait a few more years and he would happily explain to the world that those were his legends.
Yeah.
You
I
know?
mean, when the Doors were inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Eddie sang the Jim Morrison stuff.
Mhm.
And this is like
That would have been what, 95 probably? Or
no, earlier, 93
Really?
or something.
Yeah.
Like, this
Well, I
is
mean, that had to be one of the first couple classes.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is like early. And yeah, I mean, he and Mike McCready played at the Bob Dylan 30th anniversary concert in 1992. So he was always out there talking about his heroes. You know what I mean? And like The Who, how much he loved The Who.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I mean, the Who was always part of the narrative for
right.
sure. Right.
But yeah, I don't know that he would have like always talked as much about Tom Petty and Bruce Springsteen, in the same way.
And he might have, honestly. It's more just like what other people wanted to hear from him,
Right.
and what other people wanted to say about what they represented and how music was changing. And then, I mean, obviously, I guess maybe somebody else is yelling into their headphones right now that like Pearl Jam was dismissed as just like a classic rock version
Sure.
of the grunge thing at the time, anyway.
Right. Which is like, I don't know. It's all so weird. Like,
It
you look
is.
at them now and it's like, if you looked at them back then, Like you got Mike McCready dressed like Stevie Ray
Yes.
Vaughan.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they're playing classic rock stuff. And like, yeah, they were in Seattle and they had a punk energy to a sense. And like Eddie could be defiant and have like some of that, but they were not trying to tear down what came before. That was
No.
not their pose or their posture. And anything that was like a
No,
tribute.
none of those bands were really. It seems the critics who loved them maybe were.
Yeah.
And I think maybe some of the other bands probably didn't like, weren't all that into the stuff that came before them, maybe.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. So, all right. Eddie Vedder,
Yeah.
A plus. We also get our a friend of the podcast,
Friend of the
a
podcast.
former
Yes.
guest of Rock Docs,
Yes.
appearing here.
Makes multiple appearances. Yes.
Yeah.
Michael DeBar.
Michael DeBar, the Marquis, the 26th Marquis DeBar, or whatever he is.
Yes. Marquis DeBar.
Who's his doc is called Who Do You Want Me to Be? Right? Or What Do You
Yes.
Want Me to Be? And it's great. We love it. And he was nice enough to come on our show and talk. And he's a rock star and a raconteur and a lovely guy. So check out his documentary. But yeah, he's a DJ or whatever, talks on the Steven's Underground Garage, Sirius channel. So I think that's the connection there.
Which he talked about when he came on our show.
Yeah.
In his relationship with Stevie.
Exactly. So yeah. So I mean, I don't know. I don't think we need to go through this one in great chronological detail. It's just moments or chunks.
It is mostly moments, chunks, vignettes. I mean, we complain sometimes, like movies that like somehow, despite having a murderer's row of talking heads, do not manage to get any vignettes into the movie. Do not have any amusing anecdotes. This is not that. We do get a lot of amusing anecdotes, a lot of vignettes.
Yeah.
Sort of Stevie saving 10th Avenue Freeze Out is a good one. However, it is funny, like 55 minutes in, they put up a title screen that we're about to start book 2. And it's like, we've done the entire beginning of his career all the way through Bruce Springsteen releasing Born to Run. And then we go back to his childhood at like 55 minutes into the movie.
Yeah, that is a weird thing that happened. Yeah.
I was wondering if there was just a creative choice where it's just like, we gotta do the Bruce stuff. Like everyone's gonna know the Bruce stuff, and we want to have enough time to really dwell in the parts of his career that people don't know about, but they're not going to be patient to do that before Born to Run.
Right.
So they just handle the Bruce stuff first. That was my only guess.
The weirdest thing of all that is that they're talking about Born in the USA, and they play some other music that sounds kind of like Born in the USA, like they would do in a cheap documentary. Now, there's other Bruce Springsteen music in this film.
Yes.
Why would they not have the rights to Born in the USA? Like, this is like clearly, it's not like this was done without the permission of Bruce. Like,
yeah, Bruce is in the movie, right?
Yeah, Bruce is in the movie. This is like a part of the Bruce Springsteen extended cinematic universe. Like, it's really weird to me that is not that, like, they wouldn't like the ultimately it's Bruce and his team that makes the decision of whether to give the sync license, and they don't. It's not like some other record company owns that.
So here is a potential distraction, but I'm going to bring it up. Is this bar game that people love to play about how American rock and roll is less band oriented than UK rock and roll, and that this goes viral on Twitter like every 3 to 6 months about like name the biggest American rock and roll band, and that there's no definitive band that measures up to the Beatles, the Stones, the Who, Led Zeppelin, etc. Right?
Right.
You know this game.
Yeah, sure.
And the two bands that often sort of are offered and then dismissed are Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band and Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, because they aren't truly bands.
Right.
And then I wonder, when you watch this movie and the case this movie makes for how essential Stevie was into finding that early sound that Bruce didn't arrive at entirely on his own. And the important role Stevie played as a producer on those albums, and how essential his musicianship was into the stage show that they put on. Does it in any way give you hesitation about whether Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band should be excluded from those conversations, and that maybe they are? They do have as much of a 1-2 relationship at the center of the band as Mick and Keith or John and Paul.
I would say that I always thought that argument was super dumb. I've not been moved off of anything.
Yeah.
I mean, quite obviously, both
So
of
when
those
you
bands are
see
bands.
when you see that thing go viral, you're like, this is all very needlessly complicated. The answer is Bruce Springsteen and Tom Petty.
Yeah, I mean, with Tom Petty, Mike Campbell, especially in the first
Yeah.
10 years, is like as
He
much of
wrote everything.
a sonic architect.
Yeah,
And
totally.
okay, and in this case, like the elements of this is not. It just is a marketing random chance that like Bruce Springsteen and Steve Van Zandt were in like half a dozen bands together, and then Springsteen happens to get signed as a solo artist. And then he needs to put a band together because he lies to Columbia about being a folkie when in fact he's a band guy. So then he puts a band together and they have to call it something, but he's already signed as Bruce Springsteen. So it's Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. And other than that, it's a band. Like, yes, Bruce Springsteen is the only credited songwriter for any of those songs. And he's, essentially the mastermind. But that's true of a lot of bands, right? I mean, like whatever, it's not like in Oasis, like Bonehead is, really the guy behind the scenes who's doing it all. Like I mean, it's bizarre to even have that argument. So yes, Steve is essential, and Bruce would say this all day long, and anybody else.
Yeah, I think he does say it in this movie.
Yeah. I mean, they're the first two albums bricked. They're trying to do they do Born to Run. Steve's in there helping out, and then they're recording 10th Avenue Freeze Out, and it's kind of going to be like this statement piece, and like he's having trouble getting it to work, and the producers are like all up in Bruce's business, and they call Stevie and, hey, we're going to take a listen to this, and he walks in and he goes, this sucks, and he's like, and basically like this like guy who like never studied music and is just like a guy who played in bar bands and whatever, just somehow has the ability to be like, okay, the horn should do like this, the trumpet should do this, the saxophone should do that, blah 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 blah. Like whether it's from playing with Southside or whether it's just because he played with all those other, kind of oldies type bands that had horn sections and things, like he knows how to arrange, how to put the different elements together to make it work. And there's a great scene in the movie where a producer that he worked with talks about how many years later he did the arrangements for a oh my gosh, which one was, oh yeah, Ronnie Spector. Yeah, Ronnie Spector, the woman who sang Be My Baby, like, in the 90s, he comes back, and he has her come back and helps her to record some new music. And the producer on that piece like breaks down how Steve Van Zandt like arranged all this stuff, and how he was just knows where, like he could just hear, like if you walk in and a band sounds okay, he's the kind of guy who can hear just instinctively, oh no,
What's
that
missing?
this needs to come up, this needs to come down, this
Yeah.
part this comes in, this part this comes out, like all those things that a producer or arranger does.
Yeah.
Like he just has that. That's one of his big things. So yeah, that role in Springsteen, as well as kind of being his Springsteen's onstage foil and all the other musician, guitar player, all the other things he does,
Yeah,
is essential. So to say that's not a band, British music fans, if that's your opinion, you are wrong. So go whatever. I don't know. Suck on that one.
Okay. All right.
You satisfied with that?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, that's always been my opinion on that whole thing. But like, whenever I watch this, and when I watch the Petty doc, it's like, what are you guys talking about? This is obviously a band.
Yeah.
Like, they have all the dynamics of a band.
Yeah.
Okay. So then we go at 55 minutes, we start learning about Stevie's life. Frankly, the movie doesn't seem to have a great deal of interest in his young life.
No, it's cool to see his siblings.
It is cool to see his siblings. Yeah. And there's some funny stories, but it's perfunctory. We're just winding ourselves back up into his music career, his solo career through the 80s, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like kind of the main. In a way, I think from in the movie and the book, that's the thing he's most proud of and that he wants to talk about most.
That comes through very clear here. That and Sun City especially
Yeah.
are the things he is most proud of in his life, I think.
So the way that it's set up is that in the early 80s, a producer, kind of comes along and says, "Hey, you should do a solo album." And the way he tells it is that it really never occurred to him. Okay, maybe so. Um, clearly Bruce Springsteen is huge. Southside Johnny has had some success. He's contributed and written other songs that were hits. Obviously, a record company is going to come along and be like, "Oh, this guy seems to be making one hit song after the other. We should let him make a record." You know?
Yeah.
And he says he never thought about it. And then he says, like, nobody wants to hear a sideman sing love songs. Like, he sees himself as a sideman. He doesn't just want to be like the fun party guy the role that he plays in the Bruce Springsteen universe. And so he comes up with this concept where he comes up with 5 themes for he outlines this master plan to make 5 albums, and that's what he's going to do. And they're political, and they're all about particular issues. And he had only he's like a guy who says like he never read a book, and then one day he walks into a bookstore in 1980, and he just grabs a book about South American politics or something, and then next thing you know, he's read every book.
Yeah.
And
they have appearances and stuff from the time, and he comes across as incredibly articulate and well spoken on the issue.
Yeah.
It does not sound like the typical benefit album guy where it's like, "Oh, dude, I agreed to do this, but you didn't need to put a camera in my face and ask me about the issue." He's totally ready to sit down and sink his teeth into the dispute.
No, I mean, if he's to this day asked about the Sandinistas or the Iran Contra deal or any of these kind of things, he is well read into this stuff,
Yeah.
and he, so yeah, so he comes up with these concepts, and he renames himself Little Steven after Little Walter, Little Milton, Little Richard, all these other littles that he likes. Okay. And he gets jacked. I mean, following his buddy Springsteen, he he's suns out, guns out, and he just gets this whole new look. And he starts doing these albums and tours, and it never really takes off. I mean, is the bottom line. He just, he's gets really big in Italy or Germany for a while, and and then there's just not the right promotion, or this happens or that happens, and the video is not, it's just that old story,
Yeah.
where
And there's enough largesse in the music industry at this time that no one's stopping him from making records.
right.
But he's not making hit records. He's producing records.
No. And one thing about the book is much more self-effacing than the movie.
Mhm.
And the book, I mean, this is a book where if you want the real story, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, he's going to give it to you.
Mhm.
And he's also going to be very upfront about, he's not talking about dollar figures, but pretty much he's telling you where the money came in and where it went out. And he's just a guy who, he talks about this all the time. Every time he gets a little bit of money because he does a tour with Bruce, or he does the Sopranos, or this, that, he gets an idea for some big project and he dumps all his cash into it, and it flops. And then, somehow he's out on his ass, and then something comes along and he gets another gig, and he repeat. And, he's just I wish I was the kind of guy that could hold on to a buck and, make wise investments and have these things pay off. But it just doesn't, that's not how it works out. He talks about how he's well, if I had been more financially stable, maybe we would have had kids, which is really it's that, you know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah.
That part I'm not really buying, but okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's always easier not to have kids, regardless of your financial situation.
Right. Exactly. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, so yeah. So, I mean, what's your take on the 80s music? Because you get a lot of it in this documentary. A lot.
Yeah,
Of it.
it sounds great. I love it. It's we just had Steve Hyden on talking about the rise of Heartland rock. He's got a number of songs here that are absolute sick Heartland rockers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Out of the Darkness, just a fantastic song that
Sure.
you could, that stands up there with the best that Bruce was doing in that era.
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally.
Great stuff.
Um,
I'm a Patriot. I think
yeah,
has
I am a
become kind
patriot.
of a classic in a way.
I think it has become kind of a classic in a way, and I think you know they don't. While it is clear, as we said, that this is the time of his career that Steven is, I think, most proud of and looks back most fondly on, they don't overstate how big he was.
No.
They sort of make the case that he's like an artist's artist.
Yeah.
He had some esteem. He was able to tour the world, but not stadium tours by any stretch of the imagination. And like that was enough. That's kind of the take I get it. It sounds like maybe in the book he talks a little bit about not having a lot of money,
Yeah.
but in this it sort of seems the movie makes it more seem like he's artistically fulfilled.
Yeah. And he's proud of like having this band that he put together that's like, multiracial. There's men and
Yes.
women. There's, people from different kind of generations. You
It's a
know,
real band. They stay together for multiple albums. It's not.
right.
It's not just a thing that he brings in. Heavy hitters.
Yeah. Now, so we're gonna have an episode coming out that we've already recorded, but it hasn't come out yet with our buddy Jake Longstreth,
Hmm.
uh, from Time Crisis, among other things, American painter, and he famously is into the tasteful palette of '70s rock.
Yes.
Now in the book, and ties into what we're talking about the movie. Stevie talks about how, in his opinion, music sounded like shit in the '70s. Engineers took over briefly for producers. They're concerned with electrons, and everything was too isolated, and the drums sounded dead. And he was constantly working against this to create these drum sounds. So you get like the big drum sound on like "Hungry Heart," which he claims like everybody in the '80s ripped that sound off from him. And he never got credit. And so like if you think that the production of like Born in the USA is like a little over the top, which some people feel,
Hmm.
the production of Stevie's '80s stuff is like that, way beyond. Like it's fully '80s.
It's very funny that Born in the USA was the break between Steve and Bruce,
Right.
because the music that Steve goes on to produce at that point seems very much in ideological alignment with Born in the USA,
Like sonically.
sonically and production.
Yeah. And also even the themes.
Even the themes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It is kind of
absolutely.
weird that he's like, no, you shouldn't do this. And I'm going to go do that.
I mean, I'm sure it's like the narcissism of small differences
Yeah.
to quote Jake again, that like
Exactly.
Stevie's listening to this and he's just like, what are you talking about? Those things are not alike at all.
Yeah.
But to me, like I mean, that if you were like going to make a playlist of what Steve was doing at the time and what Bruce was doing at the time, they would go together very well.
Right. So then we get into the political stuff, which again is his big
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah.
So he talks about how it all kind of started with hearing the song Biko by Peter Gabriel.
Great song. Great song.
Great song. Apparently when he hears the song Biko in the early '80s, he does not know who Biko is, nor does he know who Peter Gabriel was.
It's amazing.
That's in the book. He's
Yeah.
like, apparently I found out that he was the singer of Genesis. Like prog rock missed Van Zandt hard,
Yeah.
not interested in prog rock at all. And that, so he was not into the whole Genesis thing, but he gets into Biko and he's like, who's this Biko song? And he starts learning about what's going on in South Africa and apartheid and the what's happening with Sun City and all these other things. And so he, goes to South Africa to just check it out. Like this guy does a lot of trips to like war torn places around the world just to check out what's happening. And he tells this story. It's in the book. It's also in the movie about how like he meets with these militants. There's basically like different groups at this time. Mandela's in jail. Biko's been killed. There's different black groups that are vying for taking different positions in terms of how much they're going to resist the white government and in what way, and he needs to kind of get them all on his side in order to try to have a united front against apartheid that, like, from his position, nobody in the white Western world knows about or is paying any attention to. So he kind of gets himself smuggled into these, like, this group of, like, very hardcore militants that are not eager to meet with some white dude. And he just tells a story about how he, at this point, he's kind of like he'd walked away from Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band and walked away from, like, the biggest paycheck and everything he'd been working for all these years. And he was on his own quest, and he says he just became fearless, meaning, like, these guys might kill me, I might die, and if not now, some other time, and whatever. I'm just going to do my thing. And he just tells these guys, like, hey, you guys blowing up a radio station once in a while is not going to, is not really winning you any friends, and you're not going to overturn this regime. And they're like, well, fingering their machetes. And as he tells it, they go, okay, well, what would you do? He said, well, I'm going to win this war on TV. And they're like, what are you talking about? He's like, I'm going to show the world using, art and music, things that I can connect to, what's happening, and that's going to create this boycott and this momentum to overturn this system. And I mean, this is the way he tells the story. Who knows? Nobody else who's there is there to tell the story or whatever, right? As far as we know. And so, long story short, he kind of following in the steps of, We Are the World and Live Aid and stuff gets just a unbelievable murderer's row of musicians together to do this song called We Ain't Gonna Play Sun City. And I don't know that they do the greatest job of explaining exactly what Sun City was and how it works in the movie.
No, it's mostly explained in passing through, like, media hits that Steve
Right.
was doing at the time and whatever he would say in those instances.
Right. More or less, like, what happened was there was a sanctions against South Africa, and so people couldn't do business with them. So what they did was they created these Bantustans, which was they would the white government would forcibly move black populations to these, like, outlying areas and then say these are separate countries. They're not South Africa. This is a different country entirely. And then that was a way of getting around the sanctions. And so this resort where a lot of musicians played was called Sun City, was in one of these Bantustans, and the government of South Africa kind of washed their hands of it, and people could say, well, we're not playing, it's South Africa, this is a different political entity entirely. And anyway, famously Paul Simon's playing there, etc. That whole thing is not really addressed in the movie as much, but um anyway, so he writes a song called, I'm Not Gonna Play Sun City. Not really the greatest song of all time, I think it's fair to say. And he even says, like, he's not trying to, win a poetry contest here. He's trying to get people's attention.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, he gets,
the whole thing does feel genuinely, maybe I'm being very charitable because I like Steve, but the whole thing feels less naive and less diluted than We Are the World and all the other benefit shows of the 80s.
Yeah, because he has a specific goal.
Yes, it's not just like a general, like,
let's raise money for poor people.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you get just part of the people are like Run DMC,
Miles Davis.
Miles Davis.
Yeah.
The story about that is great. Lou Reed, Herbie Hancock, Pete Townsend, Jimmy Cliff, Two of the Temptations, David Ruffin and Eddie Kendricks, Bruce, of course, Keith Richards and Ronnie Wood, Bobby Womack, Bono, Darlene Love. In the video, you get Jackson Browne in a cholo like style plaid shirt with, like, the top button. I'm not quite sure why he adopted that look at that moment. You get Ruben Blades, who, like, talks about how, in all these things they never had Latin artists, and, like,
yes,
he was happy to be included in, and represent that part of the world.
Yeah.
And so they record this album, like the single, and then a bunch of other songs, and then there's these Artists Against Apartheid concerts, and you see them pictured in the movie. Now, the movie doesn't really explain that, like, he did the Sun City album, and that got some notice and did pretty well, even though he couldn't really get radio play because it was like, it was too black for white radio and too white for black radio, and MTV wasn't, really so into, okay. Um, but then you see him appearing and singing this song at like these artists' apartheid contests. So those are actually things he was invited to do. Like he didn't organize that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as much of a like master plan that all came together as it may seem, but nonetheless, I mean, he did, raise people's awareness, and he talks about going to Congress, and you get Bill Bradley here, another great talking head. But he talks about going to Congress and meeting with senators, and he talks about how like some of the senators that he spoke to couldn't find South Africa on a map, even though the name contains two clues.
Yeah, that's good.
just
Also,
just a great line.
that's a great line. I also like Bono's line in here where he's like, "The dirty secret is like we all hate getting a call from our friend to do their benefit concert."
I love that because he's the
Yeah,
benefit guy.
yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, and like I don't know. I'm trying to think. Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan's on
Oh
the
yeah,
right,
yeah.
and freaking
So
Grandmaster Flash.
so I don't know. He takes a lot of credit
He takes a lot of
for
credit.
getting the pressure to first release Mandela and then the end of apartheid and that whole regime. Did he do a lot and put his ass on the line to raise awareness? No doubt.
Yeah.
Do I know anything more about the history of that to be able to
No.
speak about how
It-
much he did it and how much you can credit 1,000 other people? No.
Yes, that's exactly how I feel. And I mean, I think is it Eddie who says basically, and Eddie's I think even a little bit allowing for like maybe he's naive too. He says like at the time I thought music ended apartheid. Like I thought
Right.
that the boycott did that.
Yeah.
Um, he doesn't actually say I'm an adult now, and I'm here to tell you
There's a lot more to it.
music did that. Like he or conversely that there's more to it than that. But yeah, I would say that he probably stops just short of taking more credit than he deserves. He makes it clear that he put himself out there. He put a lot on the line. Seems like they did make a difference. And then what I really like is he says he sort of walks away from it all and says like
Yeah.
I came here for I said what I wanted to say. I came here to do something and to say something, and we did it. And then he stops basically.
Right.
He like
Yeah. He's like, I never wanted to be a politician.
Yeah.
And one thing that they do talk about very briefly is okay, so he meets his wife Maureen and like around 77. And you know, they've been together all these years.
Yeah.
And I mean, the book has a lot more sex than the movie does, but I mean, he talks about how like he wasn't really the marrying kind, and he talks about in the book how for a brief period of time in the 70s he was addicted to threesomes, which I didn't actually know was in the DSM of things you could be addicted to.
Sure.
But the guy liked to party.
Mhm.
But he found love, and they get married.
Seem to have a very sweet relationship now.
Yeah, the wedding looked great. Little Richard was the officiant.
Yes.
Percy Sledge sang "When a Man Loves a Woman." The wedding band from The Godfather
Yes.
was the band. I mean,
Bruce
you gotta
is
love.
his best man.
Yeah, you gotta love that. But anyway, there is one point where he's talking about all the politics stuff and going around the world, and like, there's a very brief part where Maureen says that she resented what he was doing, and
Mm.
they never really follow that up. And that was an interesting thread that I didn't. It's not in the book, and it's not followed up, but it's kind of interesting she says that, and then they did leave it in.
Yeah.
So you don't really know what that was all about, but it seems like he's kind of a crazy person in a way. Like he just follows his impulse and, kind of jumps in with 2 feet. And, I mean, she's got to be one hell of a spouse to put
Yeah.
up with. Hey, I'm quitting the E Street Band at the top of the game. Hey, I'm going to South Africa. Hey, we're going to do this now.
Yeah.
Credit to her.
Yeah. And so then he sort of limps through the 90s basically, and we begin our section on Sopranos.
Well, before that, I do want to shout out. They
Uh-huh.
he gets back together with Southside,
Yeah.
and he does a song with Southside and Bruce, and kind of gets the band back together. And there's some great aging rock guys in the 90s video clips. Like there's one kind of reggae theme song that they do, and you see like Steve and Bruce, who are probably now in their 40s at the time, kind of dancing to it, and it's like, wow, that really would not fly today. You know?
Yeah. It is a hallmark of the era,
Yeah.
the aging rock star in the 90s doing a reggae track.
Yeah. And so now we get into the Sopranos of it all.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Look, I love it. Like that is like hanging out with old pals, that whole section.
Yeah.
You know? We get to you go back into how, you know, there was not a slam dunk career opportunity to be auditioning for original programming on HBO at the time.
No.
You know?
And he was never an actor.
And he had never been an actor. Yeah. And they talk a lot about how him and James Gandolfini's friendship. I wish there was more Gandolfini. There's not a lot of clips of Jim talking.
Yeah, they just probably don't have very much.
I know. Yeah, I mean, he talked a lot over the years, but yeah. And then and you know, David Chase talks about what a great actor he was and how much he brought to it. And they, you know, and look, like I think it's important. Like Silvio's silly.
Yeah,
that's part of the character. You know, like it would be disingenuous to discuss Sopranos and talk about like Silvio like he's a method actor. You know,
he's not carrying the weight of a Michael Imperioli or
no.
Carmela, you know, what you know, one of the people that did, like, he had some heavy scenes.
Sure.
But by and large, he was a little bit of the comic relief.
Yes. But they're okay with that. They don't lay it on too thick. They don't pretend like he was Michael Imperioli, right?
Right. Exactly. No, I mean, yeah, I mean, he talks a lot about the like kind of Rat Pack aspect of it, and some stories about them all partying and like being on top of the world, and you know, I don't know. I mean, it just seems like a fun time. It's a cool hang part of the movie.
Yeah, it's a cool hang part of the movie, and also like Bruce has gotten the band back together at this point.
Right.
Right, and he's playing big shows again.
Sure.
And so, and that's what he did when he wasn't recording the Sopranos.
Yeah,
you know, he was living a pretty great life at that moment. At that period,
I mean,
you know?
Vinny Pastore is talking about how is it Vinny Pastore? One of the guys is on there talking about how he like, you know, he would be playing a show with Bruce Springsteen, you know, in the E Street Band and play for 3 hours and then get on a plane and the next morning be at 6 a.m. call for the Sopranos. And, you know, he just did it, you know, like he was not going to turn either of these gigs down.
Yes. And then I don't they sort of, they're quick about getting through Lillehammer. Did you ever watch that show?
I never did.
I never did either.
From time to time, I'm like, maybe I should check out Lillehammer, but then I just haven't.
Well, it's sort of funny because that too was like at that time doing original programming for a streaming service was slumming it.
Yeah.
So Netflix. he's like sort of like, it was like, that might've been the first, like, I think everyone talks about like Orange is the New Black and House of Cards as the first Netflix shows, but I think Lillehammer actually was.
Yeah. No, Lillehammer I think was. And he goes way more into it in the book, of course, but
okay.
Yeah, I think it's given the right amount of time in the movie.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
It's sort of funny that he is his acting career, which more or less includes 2 parts.
Right.
Was sort of on the cutting edge of 2 major revolutions in the entertainment industry over the last 30 years.
Right. Yeah.
You know, like the move to original TV programming and then the move to prestige TV programming and then the move to streaming programming.
Yeah. I mean, he basically, he had a brief appearance in The Irishman and, you know, like that's more or less it. Yeah. It is wild that, he just happened to be the guy at, you know, for the HBO revolution, the Netflix revolution, the 2 biggest things that happen. Yeah. I guess if you want to now that maybe like streaming has kind of run its cycle, and there's somebody out there who's like, you know, it's the next thing for TV is going to be this. Yeah. What you need to do is get Stevie Van Zandt.
Steven Van Zandt, like an original program on those screens on the gas station pump.
As a gangster.
It's like 3-minute shorts that are like
that's the new revolution.
That's the new revolution.
Yeah. I mean, and then we don't get a lot of the he's got this whole thing that he's been doing the last 20 years. Like he's into his whole thing is the underground garage, the garage rock revival, bringing all that classic music
The
back.
the Rascals on Broadway.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other fiasco. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and
But that's
this
all. That's all of one part. That's all of one. Like this was an important thing in American music. This set the groundwork, and I'm here to be the person who
yeah,
is talking about it all.
he's got this thing to teach kids about the history of rock.
Yeah, that he like
And
actually
it's in
goes in class. He like builds curricula.
yeah, it's in school. In schools, I don't know what schools, it's called
Yeah,
Teach Rock.
teacher.
It's part of the nonprofit Rock and Roll Forever Foundation, which creates K through 12 national curriculum. K through 12, like you can go straight all the way from not TK, but
Like
kindergarten and right up to
you,
walking into the college with
your
that.
charter school can adopt a rock track where like
Yeah, I don't really know a lot about it, but I don't
they
know.
show it in here. It looks
Yeah,
looks like they have modules and
yeah. I mean, who knows? Maybe the San Diego Unified School District
look. I'll
will
be
adopt.
honest. It's as good as anything else. It's
Yeah,
fine.
sure. That's great.
You know. Yeah.
And yeah, he got like Bruce and Jackson Brown on the board,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. So
It's funny what a pal him and Jackson Brown have became.
yeah,
They talk about like I guess I wouldn't have guessed. I'm mostly just because they come from different sides of the country,
yeah,
but I never would have really thought of Stevie and Jackson Brown. But Jackson Brown has extended screen time in this
yeah,
movie.
yeah. Jackson Brown, I just think is a cool hang.
Absolutely, yes,
Like
yeah.
if you're, the Eagles, if you're Linda Ronstadt, if you're Steve Van Zandt, Bruce Springsteen, yeah. I mean, he shows up in Rock Doc, you're not mad about it.
No, he's inner circle Hall of Famer in rock docs, frankly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't know where he is in the rock firmament at this point in terms of people's opinions of Jackson Brown, but he's
He just did a tour with that, like I think ended up being one of those. It became one of those tours that ended up being 2 years because the rightful year of it was delayed for COVID,
right.
and then when it came back, they announced a whole new set of dates
Yeah.
on the backside of it, so it ended up basically being a 2-year tour.
Yeah.
But it was him and James Taylor.
Yeah. Okay. I could see it.
Yeah.
More of a Jackson Brown guy than a James.
I
Taylor guy,
I would be there for the Jackson Brown portion of that show.
Yeah. So Steve Van Zandt, he creates wicked cool records. He records all these kind of garage band. I don't know, I mean, it's like some of that stuff,
XM channel. It's great.
some of that stuff can be real samey. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And some of it's good, but I think my sense of what happens with him is these bands like the White Stripes come out and the Hives and so forth in the early 2000s, and they're really reclaiming this garage rock stuff. And he's like, yeah, I love this stuff. I know everything about this stuff. You want to know the original guy that played organ on, the Swingin' Medallions, B-side from 1965, I'm your guy. And so he creates this record label and all this stuff to promote it. And like, it really was a trend. And like some of those bands went on, Jack White goes on to do his thing. Some of those bands are, come and go. But, it really like that's a thing that we look back on as like a couple of years of our youth, when we were in our 20s or you're in college or whatever. And it was a thing, just like the swing revival in the late 90s or, whatever wave of ska we're in, et cetera. But yeah, he's very committed to it. And I mean, I'm not knocking, I love that kind of music, but
yeah, I mean that all stuff that the label that he has now, that seems more like passion project type stuff.
Yeah,
it's a small print label, like,
oh yeah,
I don't think, I'm sure the bands that he does sign are thrilled to be signed with Lil Steven and probably are expecting some level of success. That's most likely not going to happen, right?
Yeah.
He's probably not going to break any huge bands from there, but that's fine. It's fine.
I mean, basically, the Springsteen tours are paying for all this. Is basically
Yes.
what my understanding, because none of this stuff is turning a profit. But he's out there doing his thing, and I don't know. He rocks. That's all I can say.
He rocks. Yeah, out of all the people out there doing the like ambassador for rock and roll, self-appointed position, the Dave Grohl appointed position. Lil Steven's much better.
Grohl Memorial Chair.
Yeah. I would much rather have Lil Steven in that chair than Dave Grohl.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, just because he's older, he's kind of been, he's
And cooler.
been through a lot more Oh, sure.
And
yeah,
responsible for better music and with better taste and funnier and
I mean, yeah,
less grating and more earnest and sincere.
Yeah, sure. All those things are true. I'm not even knocking Dave Grohl when I agree with all those things. That's just, I think Dave Grohl would be the first one to admit all those things.
Yeah, that's true. Probably in a way that would be like
grating,
a little bit grating.
but I don't know. Do those guys have to know each other?
Oh, dude, I bet they've like sat at a million, rubber chicken dinners together.
Yeah, the Rock and Roll Hall
about
of Fame.
the rock and roll stuff.
Yeah,
about who's going to come after them. Who's going to be?
Yeah, who's going to pick up the torch, man? Is it going to be this? Whatever. I don't know.
It's probably going to be like Jack White or something.
Yeah, Jack White doesn't really. He's too ornery.
Doesn't engage.
He doesn't really seem to, unless maybe at some point he just settles into the role. Maybe he should. Maybe that's what Jack. I mean, his new album is good. So maybe he should take the victory lap. Take the victory. It's good. Take the victory lap, Jack White. Hey, you put out you're in your whatever, you're 50, whatever you are. You put out a good album. You're getting critical respect. Take the flowers, take the chip off your shoulder, and just join your buddies Steve Van Zandt and Dave Grohl in becoming
enter your
ambassadors
your golden retriever era.
Yeah, exactly. I think that would be a good look for Jack White. I'm hoping for that for him. I feel like that would be good.
It's premature, but in 25 years,
but
let's get Ezra to do it in 25 years.
Yeah. I mean, Ezra's a little bit of a guy. He's put these guys on that
trajectory.
Steve Van Zandt's not going to be here forever, unfortunately.
Exactly.
Although you hope so, because based on this rock doc,
he seems great. He seems in good health. He seems in great spirits.
Yeah. Voice is a little raspy. His voice is a lot stronger in the book from a couple years ago, but could have just caught him after a cold or whatever. Who knows? The Disciples of Soul. He gets them back together, and he's on tour, and he's still doing that thing, and it seems cool. I don't know. Probably be a fun time to go see them at the Belly Up or whatever. The Sound. I don't know where.
Absolutely. Oh, I think probably Belly Up's too small. Humphreys would be perfect for them.
Yeah, that would be a good night.
It would be the oldest crowd.
It'd be very old.
No one would stand up.
No, but he would give you some good between songs raps.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Some stories, and tell you what it's all about. We learned this trick from whatever Benny King and the Drifters and
Del Shannon.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be a lot of that kind of stuff, and I don't know. I eat that stuff up. So anyway. I'm glad this movie exists. I enjoyed it. It's a lot of fun. It's a good hang. Movie. It's quick. I recommended it to my dad.
This movie gets a recommendation for anybody who's into this era of music. Not even specifically Little Steven. If you like this era of music,
yeah, but really anything from 1957 to 1990. Basically. But I recommend it to either, if you're listening to this, either to you or your dad. Or both. And probably one or both of you will enjoy it. No, it's good, and shout out to Little Steven. And read his book. His book is great. If you like books and sex, drugs, and rock and roll, he does not hold back.
Good.
It's a lot of that. So anyway, there you go. We did it. Disciple. Are we?
We're disciples.
I consider myself a disciple, and as
I'd say so. Yeah.
There you go. Well, to my fellow disciples, thanks for listening to Rock Docs, and we'll holler at you later.
Stop the world for a minute. He was a great performer, great songwriter, great producer.
I love his enthusiasm and encyclopedic knowledge of music.
He's a businessman. He's a philanthropist. He really is a Renaissance man.
I'm losing my balls over here. Miami Steve was a character that I was playing in the E Street Band. The Dean Martin in our rock and roll Rat Pack.
We were so close, I just wanted him near me. He just became my rock and roll brother instantly, but he did need to take his shot.
15 years. We finally made it. And I quit. The night before payday. I went from artist to activist.
I married this fun rock and roll guy, and all of a sudden, he's in South Africa.
Steve got together different genres of music.
The amount of artists that were involved.
Rockers, rappers, R&B stars.
Stephen understood rock and roll owed a debt to the continent of Africa.
There's this guy who was so well-read and so politically astute, but dressed like a dervish or a pirate. He's nothing less than a revolutionary.
But I was spiritually exhausted. I said what I wanted to say, and no record company wanted to sign me anymore. So I walked my dog for 7 years. I wanted to be very different, as different as I could be, thinking I'm never going back to music again. You know.
Stephen, the second act, it's amazing. All of a sudden, he's in television, radio. He's building a record label.
Rock and roll kept him alive. And I really do believe it's his religion.
One of the great forces in rock and roll, and one of the great forces for justice, little Stephen.
Steve's a true believer.
There's something about rock that's unique in the way it communicates emotion, inspiration, and motivation. This is what it's all about.